Hey guys, my name is Pixie and this is Fusion Table Part 2. In Part 1, we made the connection to our Fusion Table, so as long as you successfully made the connection to your Fusion Table, you are ready for Part 2. In this tutorial, we're going to add, edit, and delete data from our Fusion Table directly within our app. If you download the project file from the AppyBuilder community, you'll notice there are 4 screens in this project. We'll talk more about screen 1 and the main screen during this video's wrap-up, and everything we're doing in the tutorial will obviously be located on the tutorial screens Part 1 and 2. To recap, we created a user's Fusion Table with 7 fields: user ID, username, password, email, points, avatar, and referral. The avatar field is actually going to be an image, but we can output the rest of this data using labels. Head on over to AppyBuilder and let's get started. Add an image component, 6 labels, and 1 list view to the screen. Right now, it doesn't matter what these components look like. We're just going to play around with the data, so don't worry about the design. This image component will be the user's avatar, so let's call it Data Avatar. Then start naming the labels. We'll need Data User ID, Data Username, Data Password, Data Email, and Data Points. We're naming these components just like the columns in our Fusion Table. This label is actually going to be called Label Referral, and the list view is going to be called Data Referral. If you're using the same screen from Part 1, you should already have a Fusion Table control. I added a new screen for Part 2, so I'll just need to add a Fusion Table control using the exact same properties from Part 1. We'll add a few more components later on, but that's all we need right now, so let's head to the block section. I'm going to need to create the Fusion Table user's global variable again. Remember that this variable is the unique ID that represents our Fusion Table. Next, create 2 variables called users table and users fields and set them both to empty lists. Users table is going to reference all of the data in the Fusion Table, whereas users fields will access the individual columns or fields in our table. Now we need 7 more global variables, 1 for each of the fields in our table. Call these users, user ID, users username, users password, users email, users points, users avatar, and users referral. Set each one of these to an empty list. We'll also need a user ID and request variable. Set user ID to 0 and request to an empty text block. These variables will help us pass data through procedures and events. Next, create a procedure called Initialized Data. Grab and add items to list block for users fields, and we'll need 7 items in this list, 1 for each field in our Fusion Table. We're going to create a multi-dimensional array for our Fusion Table data. So this list should have user IDs, usernames, passwords, emails, points, avatars, and referrals. Then set global request to data. In Part 1, we used the built-in procedure that allows us to view the data in our Fusion Table. We were able to get all of the usernames and passwords. We could have gotten all of the data if we wanted to. We also were able to use a condition that let us just get the username and password for 1 user. This time we're not going to use the built-in procedure. Instead, we have the option of creating our own SQL query to retrieve the data. We'll need to create a SQL select statement. If you don't know SQL, this tutorial might be a bit tricky for you, but I will do my best to help you get the basics down. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. Some people pronounce it SQL and some pronounce it SQL. There's actually an entire history about the pronunciation, but it's really a potato kind of thing. SQL is a very easy but powerful database programming language. There are a million different commands, but the most basic would be to view, add, edit, and delete data within a database. In SQL, to view data, we use the select statement. To add data, we use the insert statement. To edit data, we use the update statement. And to delete data, we use the delete statement. If we were recreating what we did in Part 1, our select statement would look like this. And that would output all of the usernames and passwords from our users table. We could also say select username from users where user ID equals 1, and that would output Pixii. In this case, we need to create a statement that selects all of the data from our database. So our query will say select all from users, order by user ID ascending. Use a join block to create this statement. The first text block should say select all from, and make sure there's a space after the word from. Now, we can't just write users because in this case, users doesn't mean anything, but this unique ID that accesses our Fusion table does mean something. The last block will finish off the statement and sort our data by user ID. We need to always make sure that the data from the Fusion table is retrieved in a specific order. Make sure there's a space after the word from and a space before the word order. This statement doesn't do anything unless you send the query. All right, that's done. Next, create a result procedure called getRow with two arguments called row and column, or col for short. This procedure is really simple. It returns the specified cell in our data, but we'll talk more about that in a second. Our next procedure is called add with one argument called values. Set global request to add. We do have a built-in procedure that lets us add data to our Fusion table, and it is perfect, so we're going to use it. Grab the insert row procedure, set table ID to global Fusion table users, use a text block for the column argument, and separate each field with a comma. We'll add data to user ID, username, password, email, points, and avatar. You can include the referral column, but I'm not going to. Just make sure there is no comma after the word avatar. Use a join block to grab global user ID, add a comma, and the values argument. A SQL insert statement looks something like this. Notice that our built-in insert row procedure is just like the SQL statement, and our values argument is going to need to look just like this. Moving on for now, create an edit procedure with an argument called user ID and values. Set global request to edit, and let's create a query for this procedure. The SQL update statement looks like this. So our query needs to say update Fusion table users, set values, where user ID equals user ID. Make sure there is a space after the word update. Make sure there is a space before and after the word set. Make sure there is a space before the word where, and there should be no space after the equal sign. This procedure will allow us to update any row in our Fusion table, and it will only edit the row that we specify with the user ID. Send the query to finish this procedure. To delete a row, we just need the user ID. Set global request to delete. Our query will say delete from Fusion table users where user ID equals user ID. Make sure there's a space after the word from. Make sure there is a space before the word where, and there should be no space after the equal sign. Send the query to finish this procedure. When we start this screen, we need to initialize our data, and we need to make these queries and procedures work. Grab the Fusion table.getResult event, and I'm going to zoom out a tad. All right, so we have 4 queries, but we only have 1 event. We created a global variable called request, and we changed the value of request each time we created a new query. We can specify what we want this event to do based on the request that we give it. So if global request equals data, we'll do something. If request equals add, we'll do something else. If request equals edit, we'll do something else. And if request equals delete, we'll do something else. We need to be able to structure this data, and we're going to do that using all of the lists we created earlier. Set users table to list from CSV table and get result. This is going to take the data from our Fusion table and put it into a list. But that list is in a multi-dimensional format, so we need to break the data apart into smaller lists. We need to loop through the table of data and also loop through the fields in the table. Users table will start our main loop. In the second loop, I'm using the numeric iteration. I like to change the word number to I. We're going to loop from the first index to the last index in the users field list. Remember that users fields is a list where each item is another list. Grab and add items to list block. For list and item, use a select list item block. The first list is global users fields. The first index is I. The second list is item, and the second index is downcase I. To paint a picture, this is what we've done. We request the data from the Fusion table. We have a list called users fields. The first index in that list is users user ID. So all of the user IDs from the Fusion table are going to be placed in the first index. The second index in users fields is users usernames. So all of the usernames from the Fusion table are going to be placed in the second index, and so on until all of our data is organized neatly into a multidimensional array. When we retrieve the data, we also get the column titles. So the word user ID, username, password, etc. will all be included in our list. We can keep them in there, or we can optionally remove the titles. To do that, we'll need to loop through users fields again and remove the first index in each item. We're going to come back to this event later, but for right now, let's make sure that our data retrieval works. Come down here and create a procedure called display user with an argument named user ID. Data avatar should show the avatar for the user, and we created a procedure called get row, so let's use that. Let's say we want to get the avatar for user penguin. That would be row 6, column avatar. If we're using this procedure, the row is the user ID argument and the column is user's avatar. Remember that this procedure returns the value from the select list item block. That's all it does. It looks for the specified cell just like a multiplication table. We'll do the same thing for each of the data labels. Data user ID.text will get row, where row equals user ID and column equals user's user ID. Data username will get user ID username. Data password will get user ID password. Pretty easy, right? Getting the referral data is going to be a little bit different. We have a label called label referral and a list view called data referral. Create a local variable called list referral IDs and set it to get row user ID users referral. If this cell is blank, set the label's visibility to true and set the list view's visibility to false. The text on the label will say no referrals. Otherwise, hide the label and show the list view. Set list referral IDs to create a list from CSV row using the same variable. This is going to take 2, 3, 5, and 7 and turn it into a list that we can work with. Create another local variable called string usernames. Let's loop through each item in the list of referral IDs. I'm also going to change the word item to ID. We'll use a join block to create the username string. Now, the username string starts out blank, so the first time we start the loop, the string will have a comma before Colby, and we don't want that. So we'll need to segment the text to remove the first character in the username string. It's optional to add a space between each comma, but it's not necessary. Then set data referral to elements from string using string usernames. I'm also going to rearrange the visibility blocks to be below the data. This way we change our data first, and then we change which component is currently visible. Okay, let's test this out. Go back to the getResult event and call the display user procedure. I'm going to call user ID 2, which is Colby, and let's run the app. All right, it looks kind of ugly, but let's check our Fusion table and make sure this is the correct data. Avatar2.png is the little wolf icon. User ID is 2, username is Colby, password is we have a dog, email is correct, points are 0, and he has nothing in the referral cell, so the label outputs no referrals. Awesome. I'm going to set user ID to 1 this time, which is Pixii Bomb, and let's see what that looks like. The avatar is a fox, user ID equals 1, username is Pixii Bomb, password, email, points, all look good, and check out our list view. We're seeing Colby, Bear, Walrus, and Fox as the list of usernames that Pixii Bomb referred to this app. Before we move on, I want you to pause this video and play around with the list that we've created so far. Output result to any one of these labels, output users table and users fields, output users password. Let's say you wanted to display all of the users with their avatars. I've added a custom list view component to the design. Delete the display user procedure and replace it with listview custom.elements from lists. Set the list items to user's username and set the list images to user's avatar. And when you run the app, you'll see a list of all of your users and their associated avatar. Take a moment and really understand what we just did and how it works, and keep playing around with these lists. Then when you're ready, unpause the video and continue. Now I'm going to take display user out of this event, but I'll keep this custom list view. Let's make it so that when we click on a username in our custom list view, the data for that user shows up in the appropriate data labels. You can do this with a list view custom.afterPicking event. In this event, set global user ID to the selection index, then call display user and pass user ID as the argument. Run the app really quickly and cycle through the items in your custom list view. When you click on a username, that data should output to the appropriate labels. Now that we're familiar with how our data works, let's play around with the add, edit, and delete procedures. I've added 3 buttons to the design called button add, button edit, and button delete. It looks hideous, but we're not worried about the design right now. If we click on button add, we should call the add procedure. If we click on button edit, we should call the edit procedure. And if we click on button delete, we should call the delete procedure. Take a look at the add procedure. Right now, our user IDs are numbered 1 through 10. The next person who signs up should have user ID 11. The person after that should be user ID 12. The person after that should be user ID 13, and so on. In the add procedure, we're using global variable user ID, but how do we know what that is, or if that's even their correct ID? We do know that we have a list of lists. The users fields list contains a list of user IDs, usernames, passwords, etc., and each of those lists are the exact same size. We currently have 10 user IDs, 10 usernames, 10 passwords, etc. Instead of global user ID, let's grab the length of the user's user ID plus 1. Go back to button add.click event. We're going to hard code in some data and make sure this procedure works. Create a new user in the values argument using a text block following the format of our SQL statement. I'm going to create a user called Pixii. Password is bomb. Email will be pixii@bomb.com. I'll give Pixii 500 points, and let's use avatar6.png, which is the little penguin. Keep in mind that user ID and points are not enclosed within single quotation marks, but everything else is. You can write out numbers in SQL, but all strings must be enclosed within single quotation marks. You can leave a space in between each comma, but it's optional. After we insert the data in our Fusion table, let's also update our list. Create a local variable called user ID and set it to the size of user's user ID plus 1, which in this case should be 11. Use an add items to list block 7 times, 1 for each field in the Fusion table. Remember that we didn't add anything to the referral column, but we still need to update the user's referral list. We can create a procedure called Initialize Custom Listview and drag the elements from list into this procedure. I'll swap out the elements from list with a call to this procedure, and we're going to reuse this procedure in the button add event. Once we update our lists, we refresh the data on the screen. In the wrap up for this tutorial, you'll see an example of how we handle the user ID, but for right now, let's just set global user ID to 11. The argument user ID will be set to global user ID and add some values following the SQL syntax for updating data to a database. In this case, I'm going to change the password to fudge pops, and the number of points will be 999. This will change the data in the Fusion table, but we'll also need to update our list. For that, we'll need to use a replace list item block for each of the cells that we're replacing. This time we only need to update the items we're changing and not every single item in the list, and make a call to display user. On the last button, let's delete user ID 11. This will take the entire row out of the Fusion table, but we also need to take out all of the data from our list. We can do that fairly easily by looping through users' fields and taking out the index that matches our user ID. Now let's run the app and test these events, make sure they're all working properly. Hit the add button and a new user should be added to the Fusion table. Verify that the user ID is 11 and that all of the data has been added. Check the custom list view and make sure the data has been added, and click on user ID 11 and make sure the data appears in the labels below. If that's working, click on the edit button. This should edit user ID 11 in the Fusion table and edit the data for user ID 11 in our list. And once you check everything, go ahead and delete user ID 11, which should remove the user from the Fusion table and should take that user out of our list. It's pretty neat, right? Okay, time to wrap this up and talk about screen 1 and the main screen. Once you understand tutorials part 1 and part 2, take a look at screen 1. Remember in the Firebase tutorial, we did a sign in and sign up example. If you run screen 1, you'll be able to add a new user to the Fusion table. And instead of hard coding in that data, the user's information will come from these text boxes. You can also skip the sign up process and go straight to the main screen if you want. Understanding screen 1 and the main screen is your challenge for this video. You're going to go through these screens and figure out what all of these blocks do. Take a look at the sign up event. We still have an add procedure, but this time the values are added using a join block. We still need to add those single quotes and commas, and we're using the values from the text boxes and even an image component to add data into the Fusion table. When a new user signs up, they're given the option to add a referral username. I'm going to add Pixii back to the Fusion table. Username is Pixii, password is bomb, same email. I can select an avatar using a gallery component. All right, so let's pretend that Colby referred me to this app. So I'm going to put in Colby as the username for the referral. But whoops, I spelled his name wrong and the app won't let me sign up because that name doesn't exist in the database. So the app can't give points to someone who doesn't exist. All right, I'm going to spell his name correctly this time, and I should be able to sign up for a new account with this app. And there we go. Now take a look at the Fusion table data. Pretend we have this referral program. Existing users will get 100 points for recruiting new users. And if a new user was recruited by an existing user, they get 50 points instead of 0. So Colby now has 100 points, and user ID 11 was added to his referral cell. Pixii receives 50 points for being referred by Colby. The main screen is basically what we just did in this part of the tutorial, but the output is a little more organized. Instead of hard coding data, you'll be taking the input from text boxes. Lastly, notice that we didn't ever finish the got result event. It actually wasn't necessary in this example, but think about what you could add here. Maybe after you add data, you'll notify the user that the data was added successfully. Same thing for edit and delete. All right, guys, we are done. I hope you like your challenge. I think it's gonna be a good one. So don't forget to check out the AppyBuilder community where you'll find more tips and tutorials. If you have any questions about projects that you're working on, you can always ask community members to help you out. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to comment below, subscribe, and thumbs up the video. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye!